Did Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and the Minnesota Vikings make a critical error when judging the compensatory draft picks? Look, there's a lot of different things that we can say about this, and a lot of ways to read into it. We're going to look at it from a data approach, an analytical approach, a common sense approach. We're going to look at it from all angles. We're going to try to determine who's right and who's wrong. But in reality, we're not truly going to know until March. And the Buffalo Bills and San Francisco 49ers have some interesting things regarding that process as well. Welcome to the Real Forno Show.
Welcome to the Real Forno Show, hosted by Tyler Forness, publisher at The Sporting News, contributor on SKOL North's Purple Daily, publisher of Substack Run In Shooter, the host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Real Forno Show. I'm your host, Tyler Forness. As always, in the top right corner is producer Dave. Well, Dave, now I can't hear you. It's doing that same thing again we were talking about the other day. All right. Well, guys in the chat, tell us who's echoing. Hopefully it's not me. Really hope so, because, well, that would stink. Dave, I think you said you'll be right back. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Just I guess just try and figure it out. It's doing the same thing it was yesterday, where it's trying to pick it up and then it just goes kablooey. Listen. The Minnesota Vikings have had an interesting approach, and there have been a lot of interesting discussions. It has not necessarily been a fair discussion to the Minnesota Vikings, but some of the criticism are warranted. It's me. I'm echoing. Oh boy, that's not good.
How are you hearing me now?
Great.
Okay.
Apparently I'm the one echoing, which is awesome. Yep, I'm echoing. I just verified myself. What the hell, Dave?
I have no idea. Come back, go out, come back in. I'll carry the show until then.
Okay.
Hey, everybody, I want to welcome you. Sorry if I have no idea what's causing these problems, because I just updated the software. Maybe that. Doc says I'm clear. Thank you, Doc. Appreciate that. It's interesting. I want to welcome everybody here from Doc Proto. Daniel Faw, welcome to the show. I haven't seen you before. Lefty Lutz, welcome to the show. Glad you're here. And now everybody should be hearing me. Do you hear Tyler now? And is he echoing? I know there's a 15-second delay.
I really hope not.
Well, we'll find out. There's Miss Mary. Miss Mary joined us for Who Will Be King, the NFC North show, which ran a little bit after 4 o'clock this afternoon over on the Bears site, which is disgruntled, disappointed, something Bears fans or Chicago fans. It was a great show. We had a blast. You'll hear the podcast version come out probably Friday. It was an absolute fun deal. But can you hear Tyler without an echo? That's what I want to hear.
No, I'm still echoing. What? This is so frustrating.
Let me turn on.
I'm wondering if it's not even picking up the roadcaster. for sound. Input Roadcaster Duo. Yeah. Now Roadcaster just disappeared. What in the world? Now I can't hear you at all. I'm not happy. Okay.
All right.
This is stuff.
Now, I can hear me. Can you hear me? I am so sick of this already. Yes, I can hear you. Everybody out there, can you hear us? I can hear you. Are you still hearing the echo? I'm showing you an echo cancellation. Here, you. I don't think you're coming through your mic. Now you're coming in broken. I heard the breath.
I'm already not having a good day. This is not fun.
And you're not coming through your mic, coming through your computer. Dave is clear now. Doc, this is driving us crazy why this is happening lately. I have no idea why. None. Zero. Maybe I need to roll back and go to a different version of Ecamm. I don't know if it's Ecamm or not. But I think it's audio issues, which runs through Ecamm, so all my connections are good.
What's really frustrating is
you're not coming through your Roadcaster at all.
Yeah, I know. And it's plugged in. My computer's not even reading it. Now it does? Okay. That's good.
Sounds good. This has
been an incredibly frustrating. It's not synced up?
Not with your lips. No.
Fun.
That didn't look like what you were saying.
Oh, no. I was actually saying fun.
Now you're catching up.
Okay. Hopefully the echo is gone.
But
yeah. It's for context for everybody. I had to take Odie to the vet this morning because he would not sleep at all last night. And it's been a long work day. I'm tired, frustrated. And now I'm just very annoyed by this whole process. Hopefully the echo is gone and then we can kind of get started because this was probably going to be a 30 to 45 minute show anyways. Echo's gone. Thank goodness. Okay. Let's get started. Sorry if it's not fully synced. I can't control that. Okay, good.
That's internet.
So, all right. So Dave, at this point we can start the podcast version because these wonderful people have been hanging in there.
Welcome to the Real Forno Show.
Okay. Now let's have a conversation about compensatory picks. Here's the thing with compensatory picks. As much as we know the formula, and Nick Cordy of Over the Cap does an excellent job in predicting compensatory draft picks. Okay. He has a tremendous track record and he knows more about the process than essentially anybody that doesn't create the process. So he can be wrong, just like anybody. but he's right more often than not. So we're going to utilize his information and data a lot here tonight because I think his information data is really important to the story. Okay, so let's go through the chronological order of events. The compensatory formula starts from day one of free agency and ends at 3 p.m. Central Time the Monday after the draft, which would have been April 29th. 3 p.m. Central Time, the compensatory formula is over. So any unrestricted free agents during that time count toward the formula. If they have to hit a certain benchmark, I believe that benchmark is $3 million per year, give or take 100,000 or two. So essentially, if you make more than $3 million on average, you count towards the formula. And that's also an important factor because the Vikings, like Troy Dye, Austin Schlottman, Josh Dobbs, Oli Udoh, right now do not qualify toward the formula. Same with the free agents they signed in Jihad Ward, Dan Feeney, and Trent Sherfield. They also don't count toward the formula. So you have to have these things in order and you have to have these things understood. So when you're having the conversation about compensatory picks, it's essentially those making $4 million or more per year. Now, here's the thing. People are blaming the Minnesota Vikings for signing Shaquill Griffin, which eliminated, theoretically, the draft pick that they would have gotten in the third round for Jonathan Gennard. This is all projected, okay? It doesn't mean it's a guarantee. So one of the reasons why it's not a guarantee, the Buffalo Bills and San Francisco 49ers each thought they were getting a third round pick in comp picks this year. They got fourth round picks. And one of the reasons why is because of void years. Now, I'm going to actually look up Shaq Griffin's contract to see kind of what the void years look like. Because here's the thing with void years. They have a base salary, and that counts toward the formula. Where if it ends up being too high, then you can be bumped up to the next bracket. And we'll kind of explain on how all that goes. Okay. So Shaq Griffin is not making a high base salary. Most of his money is coming in signing bonus. As I try to eliminate the ad off the page, I'm just not having a good day with technology. There we go. I had to refresh the page to get rid of the ad that pops up. Shaq Griffin, $1.59 million base salary, $2.4 million signing bonus, no void years. Okay, that this is the information directly from Over the Cap. There is a possibility that just has not been updated or that information has not come to the forefront. Well, and this can happen sometimes. Alexander Mattison was apparently supposed to get $3 million fully guaranteed from the Vikings this year. We thought it was fully guaranteed. No, it was guaranteed on the third day of the league year, so the Vikings cut him for little to no penalty. That kind of stuff sometimes does not get relayed, does not get communicated properly, and therefore the website does not get updated. Nobody is perfect, but Over the Cap is far better than anybody else in the space at doing these things. So that's an important thing to know. Cap number, $4.43 million, okay? $1.59 million base salary, and then the $2.4 million signing bonus. Okay. That matters. Now, when it comes to the formula, okay, I'm going to read this based on the information on overthecap.com, which you can go on and follow along. It's under draft and compensatory formula. Okay. It essentially, you have to sign a certain level of contract, like we talked about earlier, the dollar amounts. Okay. The higher the dollar amounts, the bigger the compensatory draft pick. Now, the round for each contract is assigned on a percentile basis as follows. A third round pick is awarded to teams that have lost top 5 percentile contract players, which both Kirk Cousins and Danielle Hunter fall into. That's important here. Okay. Fourth round pick is top 5 and top 10%. Fifth round pick is top 10 to top 15, top 15 to top 25 for sixth round, and then top 25 to 35% in round 7, with the maximum amount of compensatory picks given out at 32. So that matters here, okay? So the cutoff for a third or fourth round pick is player 67, all right? Player 67 is Mike McGlinchey. $17.5 million average annual value. And that's going to be the number that matters here. Average annual value. Plus, there's a point total. Okay. So let's talk about how the point total works. And this is all off Over the Cap. If you guys have questions, please put them in the chat. I'll do my best to answer them. But Dave is going to be the one to kind of communicate because I'm going to be reading a lot of data. All right. Contracts are ranked via final numerical value based on the sum of points awarded as follows. An inverse rating of the contract's average per year, so biggest to smallest. So the number one player, according to this metric right now, is Lamar Jackson. 1 point each for each percentage point of snaps played on offense or defense with a minimum requirement of 25%. Kickers and punters earn points based on statistical performance because they can't get the same requisite amount of snaps, so they have to be looked at differently, okay? 20 or 5 points based upon being honored by the AP All-Pro or PFWA on-field award lists, okay? So, Lamar Jackson, he ranks number one in average per year, 1,878 points, okay? Then, 92 92nd percentile in snaps, so he gets 92 points, and 20 points for honors because he was the first team All-Pro. So he's number one at 1,990 points. This is going to be really important when we have these conversations about the Vikings picks, okay? So, Mike McGlinchey, 88.2% of snaps. His APY is 1794. 88 points for snaps, 1,883 points. So that's the benchmark. For retrospect, Brian O'Neill also has 1,883 points. Now, I believe the snaps is based on a rolling number. I think it is based on a 4-year average. So, and this is why it matters for Jonathan Grenard right now. So Jonathan Grenard, according to Over the Cap, is slated to be a 4th round compensatory pick. $19 million average per year. But here's the thing with Grenard. Basically didn't play at all his rookie year. And in the last 3 years, only averaged around 50% of snaps. So right now, he's only, as a career average, I think it's 34% of snaps. And Nick Cordy, search him on Twitter/X, and he has a breakdown of this too. So because he has that few of snaps so far in his career, he comes to Minnesota and he's immediately going to probably get between 60 and 90% of snaps, okay? To get over that 50% threshold, which I believe is what Cordy is talking about, he needs to average 70% of snaps. And if he gets to 70%, that will bump him up to a 3rd round compensatory pick because of where his dollar amount is. Remember how we talked about that dollar amount with Mike McGlinchey? That's going to matter here. Let's do a search. Right now, Grenard is... it's not updated for... what do you call it? For this year, because we're using some of last year's numbers for contracts because not everything's fully solidified. So this table has not been updated yet. 55.4% of snaps. Okay. No points for honors. And his APY is going to be that 19 million mark. So when you look at that 19 million mark, so 55 points plus, let's find 19 million. So 19 million is Derwin James. So 1,809 points plus 55 gives him 1,864, which puts him in that 4th round range. Now, if you bump that up by 20 points, if he gets up to 75% of snaps, okay, he is in the 3rd round range. That matters. And the reason why we're having this conversation, we'll get to in a minute, because it's about the Minnesota Vikings and it's about their process in trying to determine these draft picks. And I just realized my camera is off kilter. Heck yeah, buddy. Let's go.
Hey, it's been that type of night so far. But we have great fans that are sticking with us, even with the technical issues that we didn't used to have. That's what drives us absolutely crazy. Software updates and stuff breaks. Wonderful.
Yep. Fun. Okay. So here's where we're at. We just talked about Jonathan Gennard. Okay. And his playing time. So let's also talk about Oli Udoh.
Now, first off, before you go to Oli, I didn't know that about Gennard and the playing time, how that figures into it. And that's interesting. That's something that most people don't think of. And to me, that is fascinating because I didn't realize that figured into it. So that's good. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important part of this discussion. And we'll use that piece of information to explain why the Minnesota Vikings did not think they were getting a third-round pick for Jonathan Gennard. Okay. Now, Oli Udoh can become a eligible player for the same reasons. Playing time. I believe his contract might have playing time incentives in it, and he will get above that requisite snap count, which could bump him up into a qualifying player. It is far from a guarantee, but that offensive line for the New Orleans Saints, Dave, it's not good, and they really do like Oli Udoh. There's a chance that he plays, and then he plays a lot. So that's a non-zero chance. If Brock Purdy gets hurt, guess who's playing for Brock Purdy all year and probably qualifies as a compensatory free agent? Josh Dobbs. So there are those two elements here too. And you can also talk about the fact that the Vikings probably expected Dalton Risner to sign somewhere. Because of how things happened last year, I think that they probably shouldn't have accounted for that. They should have understood that he's probably going to wait it out and be extra patient when it comes to his new contract because, well, he waited last year, but he also didn't want to wait this year. And he just wanted starter money, which is between $8 and $9 million. I personally don't think he's worth that. I would have given Ezra Cleveland that money, but he's not here anymore. But that's just me. And I wrote about Dalton Risner the other day, talking about why the Vikings did not re-sign him. So I highly recommend you go check that out. Now, the Vikings right now have 5 CFAs lost. So compensatory free agents. 6 lost. Kirk Cousins, Danielle Hunter, DJ Owana, Marcus Davenport, Jordan Hicks, KJ Osborne. They gained 5. Sam Darnold, Blake Cashman, Shaq Griffin, Jonathan Gennard, Andrew Van Ginkel. Griffin right now is projected as a 4th-round pick. Here's where that's important and why there's extra frustration with the Minnesota Vikings. If the Vikings did not sign Shaq Griffin, and this is why public perception, I think, is being treated a little bit unfair because of how this chronological series of events happen. Fans are equating signing Shaq Griffin to not getting a compensatory free agent. All right, not getting a compensatory pick. Sorry. Yes. Not getting a compensatory pick in round 3. I don't think that's fair. But I also understand how people are making that conclusion. Well, we had it, and now we don't. The process is very fluid. And the Vikings signed Griffin, I believe, March 20th? So it wasn't like, hey, they signed him 3 days before the draft, and it's like, well, Risner's never going to sign now. It's right before the draft. No, they signed him in March. And you can argue that, hey, maybe he's not worth it. Maybe you'd rather have the 3rd-round pick. Look, draft picks are great, but let's also be real. A comp 3rd is probably not going to work out the way you want, whereas Shaq Griffin is a starting quality player. Heck, you could take the 3rd round. Hey, maybe he'll be something. Maybe he'll be Shaq Griffin. Shaq Griffin was a 3rd-round pick. I think it's fair to criticize the process if they botched it. If they did not know that they were going to get a 3rd-round pick and they would have gotten a 3rd-round pick, and then they signed Griffin, and then Griffin just doesn't play or whatever, I think you can have a outward look on that process and be like, hey, you probably screwed up. But Griffin is a solid player who could end up being a starter for this football team. A starter, to me, on this football team is worth more than a compensatory third-round pick. And you know what? That might be a hot take. I don't think it should be. I would love to have a second compensatory third-round pick, but I'm not sacrificing a starting caliber player just to get it that comp third, because that comp third may not be anything third for 2 to 3 years. I get a starter now.
That's
so I don't think it.
I was about to say, you get the starter now versus a compensatory third-round pick, which is the ass end of the third round. That has to take time to develop. What's more valuable to us now? The guy that could possibly start.
And let's also be real here. The Vikings still may end up getting 2 compensatory third-round picks. It's not an impossibility. And we'll circle back. There's a lot of information and a reason why we're kind of jumping around a little bit, because everything matches up together. Everything matters within a certain context. Okay. Now, when we're having the conversation about these picks, here's what the Vikings ended up saying. So I wrote a piece Monday talking about how the Vikings potentially made a fatal flaw with draft picks because of exactly that. And this is what Nick Cordy wrote, and I'm going to read it verbatim. Okay. And he ended up apologizing for talking about it in really non-ambiguous terms, matter-of-fact terms. And I think that was a little bit unfair, and he agreed. This is what he wrote, though. And quote, the starkest example of this, mismanaging the compensatory pick process, essentially, it comes from Minnesota. The Vikings were expected to possibly see 2 players, Kirk Cousins and Danielle Hunter, leave the team for top-tier deals elsewhere, and that is what happened. Vikings also lost several other compensatory free agents, but were also aggressive in signing compensatory free agents of their own to offset some of those departures. Also fair to note, Aaron Jones was not one of those. He was released. He did not qualify as an unrestricted free agent in this context, okay? Nevertheless, they had at least balanced this to where the third rounders for both Cousins and Hunter leaving were on the board. This is also important. Because Grenard was a 4th rounder, he does not cancel out a 3rd rounder unless there's only one, like a plus minus of 1. Okay, so if there's 2 players, you don't cancel up, you cancel down. So the Vikings would have gotten 2 third-round picks. This is where some of that frustration comes into play and why the chronological series of events matters when we're having this conversation about public perception. Now let's get back to the piece. Nonetheless, they had at least balanced this to where the third rounders for both Cousins and Hunter leaving were on the board until they signed Shaquill Griffin to a 1-year, $4.55 million contract, leaving the Vikings with a net loss of only 1 CFA, giving the formula no choice but to cancel out Hunter's contract with Griffin's. Now, it's fine for a team to conclude that signing a player now is better than getting a comp pick later, but adding to the intrigue are multiple reports that say the Vikings expect multiple comp picks to offset the trade-ups they made in the draft. Like all humans, I am fallible, and it's possible that I missed an additional CFA that departed. He did not. Another possibility is that the Vikings, like many, expected Dalton Risner to sign a contract before the draft. But unbelievably, this is the 2nd straight season he has failed to do so. But as I see it now, the best chance the Vikings could have to get the Hunter third is if Oli Udoh starts the whole season on the offensive line for the Saints. Even more daunting would be if Josh Dobbs somehow starts the whole season for the 49ers. End quote. It's important to have the conversation about the chronological events because Shaq Griffin is getting blamed for this when it's not his fault. Now, it's also interesting that the Vikings, based on reading this and based on some quotes from Ben Gessling on KFan on Tuesday, said that I read into that the Vikings were projecting to get 2 first-round compensatory picks. Sorry, 3rd round. I was wrong. I misinterpreted. Now, here are some clarifications from Ben Gessling on Twitter earlier this morning. Okay. On the Vikings comp pick situation, and I'm quoting here, I'm told the team was always expecting one and only one third-round pick next year for losing Kirk Cousins. The Vikings figured Jonathan Grenard's deal would cancel out Danielle Hunter's contract. They never expected 2/3. As I understand it, the Shaq Griffin signing on March 19th came after the Vikings had already estimated they'd only get one, not two, third-rounders next year. They determined he wouldn't cost them a second third because they never expected to have one in the first place. If Griffin plays enough, it's possible he'd factor into the calculations for a later round comp pick, but the Vikings projections had already ruled out the possibility of a second third before they signed Griffin. This is where that playing time comes in, Dave, because Jonathan Grenard not having factored into the playing time based on over the cap's projections, which they're public projections, that factor would cancel out that Danielle Hunter pick, because if he plays enough, he's going to qualify at a different level with that point system, and that's how they're going to end up getting it. Now, there are instances of getting a quote-unquote raw deal. You can go look it up. The Buffalo Bills and San Francisco 49ers were expecting third-round comp picks. They got fourths because of how everything ended up coming around with when they fully processed everything, okay? Very frustrating. Very frustrating. But there's a comment from Battle to Heaven. If you look at OTC, they projected Grenard for 1,861 total points. The cutoff mark is 1,897, which I forgot to go to another tab. But they only project 35% snap share for Grenard, which is what he currently has. Hence why the lower round projection. The Vikings are projecting him to play probably 80 to 90% of snaps. Last year, Danielle Hunter, DJ Wanham only missed like 3-4 snaps a game. So that's not absurd to think about. And when they're making their projections, they have to make it with those things in mind. So they weren't expecting the third round comp pick. Now, if Grenard did count as a third, you would lose a third and then you would get another comp pick. So let's go back to here. Okay. So right now, Grenard counts as a fourth. The Vikings would end up getting, 3-3, 5, 6. They'd end up getting a 7. So they get a third and a 7. So based on the Vikings projections, signing Shaq Griffin cost them a comp 7th. Who's going to be mad about a compensatory 7th round pick? I'm not mad about a compensatory 7th round pick, Dave. Like, to me, that's fine. Shaq Griffin could start for this football team. Now, I know somebody said in the chat earlier, I think it was too evil to hope. And if it was somebody else, now let me know. The last 2 years show that, he probably isn't good enough to start. And he did have a rough 2022. Absolutely. In 2023, played for multiple teams. That is a very fair criticism. But I also don't think he's hopeless. I think that he can play, especially if the Vikings do a lot more zone. That is where Griffin really thrives. So there's a chance that he can end up playing some real snaps for this team. And I think that it's fair to give up a compensatory pick because that 7th is probably going to do jack squat for you. Griffin could be a real contributor in more ways than necessarily on the field. Hey, Griffin, you're a similar build to Caleb Evans. Help him, mentor him. Let's get him to a better spot so he can be a better contributor for this football team. I don't think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has been given the amount of grace and understanding as somebody else in the position would have. I understand that there's a lot of frustration with how Rick Spielman handled the team, and then there's a lot of unknown. And I think that unknown has caused fear with Vikings fans because there is fear in the unknown. That is human nature. If you are worried about the unknown, and to evil hope, if B-Flow can fix Griffin, I will be okay with this. Yeah, and I think that's also a fair criticism. If you can't fix Griffin, then I think it's going to be less about the compensatory picks as far as how the criticism gets marched, but you gave him enough money and he stunk. And I think that signing can be criticized in that way more than it would be for the compensatory formula, even though the compensatory formula being screwed up is the result of the signing. So the Vikings don't believe they're going to get another third round pick. And I think it's also important to talk about Ben Goessling, because Goessling is reporting it from the perspective of the team. The team is feeding him this information. Why is the team feeding him this information, Dave? Why is the team telling Ben Goessling these things? You know why?
Because they want to get out their message, their spin on this whole thing.
It's public relations. It's the public relations game. And the Vikings do a tremendous job of it. They do a tremendous job with public relations, getting their message out and getting it out with a lot of positivity, with people who are credible. And Goessling gets almost all the contract details. That's like his niche in the Vikings beat. Nobody else gets contract details. Goessling does. Now, the Vikings beat doesn't break literally anything else. National media does. That's Tom Pelissero. Now, you need to remember, Pelissero and Jeremy Fowler were both on the Vikings beat at one point. So they have really good relationships, but now they're national entities. Tom Pelissero with NFL Network, Jeremy Fowler with ESPN. That matters here. But when you're talking about, okay, I want to address this from Dave L. Evans' zone. Flo wants big outside guys that can man up. That's why Griff and Jackson and Booth all make the team. Dave, Shaq Griffin is a zone corner. So I don't necessarily think that's a 1-to-1. I don't think they signed him to be this man cover guy. He was drafted to be a Seattle cover 3 corner. That's what he is. He's not a guy who excels in man coverage. And I think Too Evil hope that's not a dumb question. Flores is going to give his opinions on all defensive players. Like, he may get overruled, but if he's like, I don't know about this guy, and Kwesi's like, I love him, then that guy's probably coming in, and Flo kind of has to deal with it. But I don't think if Flo's like, I hate that guy as a player, I don't want him on my football team, I don't think that the Vikings are making that move. That's my read on it. Don't have any inside information, but Kwesi is really big on collaboration. There was a lot of collaboration with the NFL draft process as far as finding the quarterback. And I think that all matters. And I don't think you collaborate a little bit here, but not a little bit there. So I think that Flores had a big say in that. I think he's had a big say in all these guys. Now, let's talk about one last thing with these compensatory free agents, okay? It's easy to get on Kwesi because we don't understand his full process yet. And I think there have been too many people that have jumped the gun in criticizing him without trying to dive in and understand why. Now, I will admit I've been a little bit guilty of this too, but I come at it from like specifically that's the Dallas Turner pick. Not the biggest fan of it in real time, especially considering the amount given to go get him. And Chop Robinson was still on the board. I would have much preferred Chop, and I still do prefer Chop. Now, what I did do was I kept an open mind. I watched the film from a different lens, and I came away thinking, okay, this is a guy that Brian Flores was in love with. If Brian Flores, who is infinitely smarter than me, wants him to play on his defense, who am I to judge? Who am I to say, no, I think you're wrong. I think you're dumb. No, that's not how that works. So I think overall we're in a good spot. I think overall Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is doing a lot of the right things. And I think overall, Dave, we may only get 1 third-round comp pick, but I think his process is being unfairly criticized because of how it happened in chronological order, because it's not always that simple. And you know what? If they didn't sign Griffin, and let's say Grenard ended up being a 3rd round comp pick, we would have just gotten a 3rd and a 7th, and then the inverse would happen. Well, if we were only getting a 3rd and a 7th, why didn't you try and sign somebody to help you now instead of getting a 7th round pick? That inverse is fair too. So I think we need to try to understand his thought process and understand how he's approaching things before we jump to criticism. I still would have rather had Chop, but I took the time and I looked at his process and I looked at the idea of Dallas Turner, and I came around. And I think we need to do that a little more than just jumping the gun. And I think this compensatory pick situation is a prime example of jumping the gun because he was the last signing in chronological order.
I agree. You got to look at it. It's just like the draft. When we traded up with Houston, that was in anticipation we'd need that to go get a quarterback. Well, we didn't have to. And then we had a top 10 defender fall in our laps or the availability, and we went for it. That makes sense to me. Now, whether, the whole, we spent too much. Well, you kind of look at it in chronological order. What happened when? And that, you would go, yeah, that's a good pick if it was just straight. And you thought, oh, wow, look what we got. But because all that stuff happened first, you can't see that. And people want to be hypercritical over the moves the Vikings make. They've been that way for 60 some odd years. So that's what fandom is. But you got to look at it, from, well, did they make the right decision at the time? We can go back and look at it, in hindsight and go, nah, that was an absolute fail. Selecting Christian Ponder as an example, or some of the corners we selected, right, that didn't turn out. You go at the time, that was the best selection, right? That made sense. But when you look at it in hindsight, it was like, we wish we'd gone for this dude. Well, you got to look at it this way. And I think Kwesi's working on what he's got at the time, what's the best for the Vikings. And I think that's how he's working this.
Yeah. And I'm really intrigued to kind of continue to learn more. I'm going to do a deep dive at some point this week or next week, looking at the Vikings' history of draft picks. And the history of draft picks in itself, I think, is a really intriguing one, because the draft picks for the Vikings, and trying to understand if there are any trends with metrics, if there are any trends with like splits, athletic testing, trying to figure out, okay, can we find anything that links these players with public data? And I am intrigued to kind of find that out, because I genuinely don't know. And I don't think anybody truly knows.
Well, and go further back than that, and you have Daniel talking about how his gut was wrong on Erasmus James. There's another who's the best available at that time, and they went with that. So, yeah, it takes first off, it takes cojones to try to make the best decision at the time.
Yeah.
And we look at it, in past tense all the time. Well, did that work out or did that not work out? We got to view that in that. So does that make sense when the stuff happens, whether it be, in this case, Griffin? Did that signing of that free agent make sense? And my answer is yes, it did. We needed to improve the corner room. Did we? Whether it be he mentors Evans, possibly, or he's a starter, yes, right? All that makes sense. Now to go back on it after the fact and say, well, it didn't get us this compensatory pick because we're not in the Super Bowl window yet. Well, we don't forecast that window to be open until 2025. Well, if we have a starter now that mentors somebody, I think that's more beneficial than waiting on a third round draft pick that we hope turns out, and you will usually take 3 years, which puts you to 2028, to develop into a decent starter. So I think that's the correct move. Too Evil asks, was Kwesi too aggressive in this draft? Should the Vikings have drafted Joe Milton?
No.
Joe Milton, I agree, is a no. Too aggressive. I saw a deal today where some old heads, whether it was 33rd team or whatever the heck it was, or front office people on current teams, they didn't expect Kwesi to be the type that trades up. They expected him to be the type that trades for quantity. Mm-hmm. And this sort of surprised them. We'll see how it goes. I like it. I would rather be aggressive. Aggressive tends to win. Do you lose sometimes? Absolutely. But do you win sometimes? Oh, you betcha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we're gonna find out. We're gonna find out how this compensatory formula ends up looking at the end of the year. We're gonna find out a lot of things about this Minnesota Vikings franchise. We're gonna find out if JJ McCarthy is the guy. We may not have a complete answer by the end of the year, but we're gonna have a good idea, more likely than not. And that's our show, guys. We're gonna be back on Monday. Next Wednesday is projected schedule release. There is a chance that we modify the start time of the show to reflect the schedule release. So be on the lookout. And the easiest way to do that is to subscribe and ring the bell so you get notifications on when we go live. On the podcast feed, make sure you keep an eye out for Who Will Be King, which Dave recorded earlier today. And also 2 Old Bloggers this Sunday at 4:05 Central Time. You will not want to miss it. We're going to be here when the Jefferson contract extension signs, when Christian Darrisaw signs his extension, any big news. And on Monday, we're going to talk a lot about rookie mini camp. And I may even do a podcast episode or something, just talking a little quick hitter about how, like what to look for in rookie mini camp and can you really take away anything from it? So be on the lookout for all that. Thank you guys so much for joining and dealing with all of our technical stuff at the beginning. I hate technology, even though it's great.
Speaking of rookie mini camp, before you go on to the closing up the show, there's only been one team in the division that's had theirs already. That was Green Bay. They had theirs this week. Everybody else has it starting on the 10th, Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, Green Bay fans were all doing this over their draft picks, as they normally do. Putting out what to look for would be a great thing. I highly encourage you to do that. Record it and we'll put it up, buddy.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you guys for joining. I'm Tyler. He's Dave. SKOL Vikings.
SKOL Vikings. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love, our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching the Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone!